will help prepare us for any legislation that we may be seeing possibly next week. So the topic is K-12 education at-risk funding. So if you have your reviser of statutes review sheet, Nick's going to walk us through it, but really I want you to be familiar with the statute. If you're familiar with the statute, then what we're going to do next will make sense. And I do not think this will be a long meeting, so I just anticipate that we should be finished in an hour. And thank you, Representative. Let's go ahead and do bill introductions, so I don't forget. Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce 24 RS 2889, which will address a Department of Defense Kansas legislative priority to minimize IEP delays for all Kansas students, including military dependents.
Thank you. Any others? All right, reminder, Monday is your last day. All right, Nick, we are ready when you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So committee, in front of you is a memo that just kind of highlights the at-risk provisions that are in the KISA school finance formula. I will note that attached to the memo at the back are the statutes that are referred to, so you can always look to those statutes for the exact language that I'm going to be discussing. And I've kind of talked about this through multiple, I think, this committee in prior years, and then the interim education committees as well. So as you all know, there's an at-risk student weighting and a high-density at-risk student weighting that is provided through the KISA school finance formula to provide monies to educate students who are in need of at-risk educational services. And you can see, I'm not going to cover those in detail, but you can see the weighting amounts and how those weightings are calculated. I will note that when the KISA was enacted, there was the legislature chose to do the high-density at-risk student weighting both at a district level, and then provide also an option for school districts to do that weighting and determine that weighting on a per school building level. And you can see how those weightings are calculated there. Also in the school finance formula is a statute that establishes the statutory criteria. This is KSA 725153A. This establishes the statutory criteria with which school districts use to determine whether a student is eligible to receive at-risk education services. And you can read on page 2 of my memo, and then continuing on page 3, what those identification criteria look like. Generally, the student is falling behind academically, has a high rate of absenteeism, has repeated suspensions or expulsions, is homeless or migrant, is identified as an English language learner, has social emotional needs that cause the student to be unsuccessful in school. And then when the legislature codified these state board requirements, the legislature chose to add that students that are identified with dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia are also students that should be identified as eligible to receive at-risk programs and services within the school district. So the KISA school finance formula, I'm on page 3 of my memo, provides certain requirements that pertain to how school districts have to account for and also expend their at-risk education monies that they receive. So generally, the law states that the purpose of school district at-risk educational programs is to provide students who are identified as eligible for at-risk educational services with additional opportunities, interventions, and evidence-based instructional services that are above and beyond regular educational services. The KISA requires that school districts transfer all the monies that they receive from those weightings that we discussed, the at-risk student weighting and the high-density at-risk student weighting, to the school district's at-risk fund. It also requires districts to transfer monies generated from the district's local option budget that are attributable to the at-risk student weighting to the at-risk fund of the school district. And then the law requires that at-risk expenditures from that at-risk fund be only made for certain purposes. So these expenditures that school districts make from the at-risk fund shall only be made for at-risk provisional and at-risk educational programs personnel providing educational services in conjunction with those programs, supports for classroom personnel. These are professional development for evidence-based best practices for those educational programs, and then for services that are contracted by the school district that are in relation to the provision of at-risk educational programs. The law also requires that the delivery of at-risk educational programs and services may include, but is not limited to, things such as extended school year, before or after school programs and services, summer school, extra support within a class, tutoring assistance, and then also possibly a class within a class for at-risk identified students. The law requires as you all know, the state board to identify and approve and publish a list of evidence-based best practices for the provision of at-risk programs and services, and set some requirements with what is needed to be provided on that list. And then the law does prohibit any school district from expending any at-risk monies from their at-risk funds on any program or services that is not on that state board approved list. There's some requirements with how a school district can start up a provisional at-risk program and use that provisional at-risk program to demonstrate that it's an evidence-based program. And then after 3 years of that program being used, if it does show that it is evidence-based, the state board is required to put that program on the list for all school districts to use, and for that school district to continue using that provisional at-risk program. I will note the law, as you recall from the LPA audit, does define evidence-based instruction as an educational delivery system that is based on peer-reviewed research that consistently produces better student outcomes over a 5-year period. And then, Madam Chair, finally, in these at-risk laws, and kind of something we're going to be, and Jenny's going to be covering here soon, is the at-risk reporting requirements that are in current law. So current law requires school districts to annually submit to the State Board of Education reports on their at-risk programs and services that they're providing to their students in the school district. And these reports to the State Board of Education are to include the number of at-risk students who are identified and provided services by the school district, the type of those programs that the school district is providing, the data and the research that the school district is utilizing to determine what those programs and services should be, and then any other information that's required by the state board. And then lastly, as part of this reporting requirement, each school district is required to track and report to the state and report to the state board the longitudinal performance of students who are continuously receiving at-risk programs and services in the district's at-risk program. And then this reporting should include, if it's applicable, the data for these students with regard to state assessment scores, Kansas English language proficiency assessment results, 4-year graduation rates, some progress monitoring data, norm reference test results, criterion-based test results, IEP program goals, attendance numbers for these students, and also average ACT composite scores. And Madam Chair, that's a quick overview of what your at-risk laws require in statute, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, well, we're going to hold off on questions because I think today's purpose is going to make more sense when we get into the next part for it. So thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. So committee, if you will turn to page 9 that Nick provided, and I want you to go down on the left-hand column to the lowercase e under item 6. It says each year the Board of Education of each district shall. So you're going to be going from E at the lower part of the column to the next page in statute, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Again, I think it's always important to kind of review what's actually happening in real time with our schools, and that's why we have 5 randomly selected school districts that Jennifer will explain how she selected them. And then we're going to kind of use this as our guide, the statute as our guide, to see what the schools are providing back in their reports. Then after Jennifer makes her way a little bit through it, Then we'll open up for questions, and you might have a question for Nick, you might have a question for Jennifer, and then we should be able to wrap up. The goal is 4:30. All right, Jennifer, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Light, and I'm the fiscal analyst here for KLRD. So the big packet you have in front of you that the front cover says LCP annual report is 3 years worth of reports for 5 school districts. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into a quick dive into the LCP's annual reports from the school districts to KSDE. As an overview of the document itself, it is the way I've compiled it is school year.
I want to ask you a quick question. Sure. What is LCP?
So LCP is the local consolidated plan.
Okay.
That is the annual report that every school
Thank
district
you.
has to do. So the first section is for school years 2020 through 21. Then we have the same 5 school districts for 21, 22, and then finally the school districts for 22, 23. If you turn to the second page of the document, I'm going to just kind of walk us through exactly what the school districts have to provide in this document. The school districts must answer the following questions: the number of unduplicated students who meet the state's at-risk criteria, which is not to be the free lunch count. It's supposed to hit the criteria listed under number 1. Number 2 is how many of these students were served with the state at-risk funds. 3 is how many at-risk students received at-risk services through other funding sources, such as Title I. 4 is what research the district relied on to determine that a need for services or assistance existed. 5 is which services and/or assistance were provided with state at-risk funds, and there are a listing of them that they can check any and all that apply. Number 6 is to describe the services provided with the state at-risk funds. 7 is what were the results, effects of providing at-risk services, and they need to, results are student impact data, and the providing is assessment data, graduation data, data like that. 8 is providing a list of evidence-based programs and/or practices utilized successfully in the at-risk program. And then 9 is, did the district use any practice program that is not on the approved list or does not have an evidence basis? For most school districts, we're talking a 2-page document for this, and then at the bottom, you can see that that KSDE can respond and ask questions or clarification, and the school district can then follow back up and get those cleared up. KLRD was asked to select 3 to 5 school districts at random for this presentation. The way that we chose to do it is there are 8 educational opportunity regions within the state of Kansas, according to the State Department of Education. Those would be Kansas City, Northeast, Southeast, North Central, South Central, Northwest, and Southwest, and Wichita. For this discussion, I looked at 5 school districts, so I used a randomizer to choose either the north or south option for the east, central, and west regions, and then kept Kansas City and Wichita to ensure that we had high FTE districts as well as low FTE districts when we were doing the randomization. Once I had the districts, I then used a randomizer for which county for each of these districts, and then I used a randomizer again to choose the actual district or school district within that county. So we used a randomizer 3 times to make sure that we were definitely getting an across-the-board amount of difference. For your information, in school year 2020-2021, these 5 districts served a combined FTE enrollment of 29,037 FTEs, and in 2022-23, they served a combined FTE enrollment of 28,159. The 5 school districts that were chosen are USD 225 Fowler, USD 234 Fort Scott, USD 265 Goddard, USD 407 Russell County, and USD 500 Kansas City. As a high-level overview just over the entirety of the 3 years, 25,181 at-risk students were served in these five districts alone in school years 2020 to 2021. It was 25,573 in 21-22 and 24,623 in school year 22-23. For the rest of the time, I'm going to focus on school year 22-23 as they're the most recent, but I did want to make sure that you had a 3-year look back so you could do some comparisons yourselves in your own time. About 2/3 of the way through the document, and I apologize, I didn't tab it for you, but they go in order of the district numbers. So it's school district 225 for Fowler for school year 22-23. And I'm going to provide a couple of just collective thoughts over the 5 different school districts, but I do want to point out some differences between them as we go. Most of the 5 schools that were in the survey served all of their identified students from question 1 with their at-risk funds, which means that if you look at question 1, they ask for the unduplicated number of students who meet the state's at-risk criteria. So for example, in 225 Fowler, that's 32. And then in question 2, they answered how many of the identified students in question 1 were served with state at-risk funds. And that is, again, for the school year 22-23 for school district Fowler, 225 is 32. So they did serve all 32 of their identified students with state at-risk funds. Most of the schools did do that. USD 407 Russell County did not serve all their students from question 1 with at-risk funds. There is a difference of 182 students between those identified in question 1 and question 2 for Russell County. In question 3, the Russell County does say that 187 students did receive funding through other funding sources, so it's entirely possible that the funding was made up entirely through those other funding sources, but I do not have any more further information regarding that. But I did want to point out that one of the school districts within this did say that they did not cover all of their at-risk students through the at-risk funding. The districts also vary in the number of services and/or assistance which were provided with at-risk funds. So if you look at question 5, each district then can check all the services that apply for that district that they chose to use the funds for. USD 225 Russell only used their money for additional in-class assistance and tutoring programs, whereas USD 500 Kansas City utilized the entire list of 7 services. I do want to point out that USD 265 is the only one which lists other services. There is a box where you can specify anything else that you chose to use the services for. They included a reading specialist and reading and classroom para-educators as services that the at-risk money funded, and they have done that for several years at this point. As far as question number 7, what were the results, effects of providing at-risk services? Most of the districts say that they outperformed in English and math, at least at several levels. A couple of the districts did report that some of the school grade levels did go down in one year, but overall the numbers went up. There is also a significant number of increases in graduation rates. Schools indicated, both Fort Scott and Kansas City indicated that there were positive trends for discipline incidents over the course of the year that they attributed to the at-risk funding. So Fort Scott, for example, listed that there was less vandalism, there was less inappropriate computer use, bus conduct, inappropriate behavior, things like that, that they attribute to the at-risk funding. Also, across the board, in general, the schools had higher recovered credits, and what that is in relation to is that there is a box that says high school credit recovery courses, which is course completion or makeup, and so schools were reporting that students who were able to utilize those courses were able to increase the number of classes that they completed or made up over the course of the year. Finally, I just want to point out that in the number 8, they do list in 2022-2023, there is 125, if you count each listed program individually across the 5 school districts, they list 125 evidence-based programs. If you combine all 5 of those districts together, it's about 90 programs in total that the 5 districts used for successfully in the at-risk program, and of that, about 35 is utilized in multiple school districts. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, so thank you very much for your review. There's a whole lot to look at, and you didn't really know probably what you were going to be getting into. So I'm going to start off the discussion, and it actually is a discussion with us. And so you can go ahead and have a seat, Jennifer, and you can be on hand to answer questions, because I'm going to pull out a couple of the schools, and I want to ask you all questions. Or let you ask questions about what I found. Because, you know, as we're looking at this, the point of the legislation was, if we're going to give over $700 million, I think it's around $750 million worth of at-risk funding. That huge increase was prompted through the Gannon decision. And I think in the last 2 years, we've increased it quite a bit. So regular at-risk funds went from 60-some million to maybe 90. It's a big jump. I'm not exactly sure. I've got it. Actually, you have it in that book right there. But my point is we're trying to actually ascertain if what we're doing is causing an effect. So our dependent variable is are at-risk kids doing better? And our independent variable are all those things that we're trying to do. And are they working? So I'm going to ask you to locate, I'm going to pick on a couple just to get the discussion going. So the first one, let's look at Goddard. It's the first one. It says it's school year 21-22. And if you turn to the third page, and it would be the question that says, what were the results, effects of student impact data? Let's see if you can find that. It is the 2021-22. So it's going to look at that. Yeah, but you're going to... Did you reformat? Because this is what I've got. Do you have another package you can work off of? Well, actually, if you could help me find it, it'd be a lot faster. If you find it, it's this one. And just tell everybody what page. It's about halfway through? Okay. So did you locate? Because this is important. And I'm gonna share with you two. And I think this is the same now, right? So, well, and I do. Okay. Okay, well, they're identical. Okay, so I want you to go to the third paragraph. And now remember the question, what were the results, effects of providing at-risk services? All right, so let's see what the reported results or effects were. It says our state assessment scores from spring 2021 and spring 2022 are consistent in ELA in grades 3 through 8 and 10. At the elementary level, grades 3 through 4, on average, 60% of our students scored levels 3 or 4. At the intermediate level, and then it goes on. So let's just double check that. Because who's reading these reports? And is this accurate information? And is this helping them improve the lives of these students? So I always qualify this because maybe I read it wrong, but I pulled it up on the website and I looked for 2022 for ELA for grade 4 because it said between grades 3 and 4. So I just chose grade 4. I found that there were not 60% of our students scoring 3 and 4. By the way, 3 and 4 is proficient. There was 73.7% that were not proficient. That's a big difference. I'm not understanding what this report is saying. If they're saying 60% of our students are proficient on average in levels 3 and 4, and I see the number 73.7 that are not proficient, how in the world are they supposed to change or improve outcomes based on something that's not even accurate? Again, if I've misread something. So then I go to the math, and you can do the same thing in that. But, I mean, and then what does consistent mean? Consistently low? But in here, that's not even particularly accurate. Let's go to another one. Let's go, and again, not picking on them, but what I'm picking on is that we have $750 million to improve outcomes, and we're asking for a longitudinal review. And we're asking for a dependent variable to be reviewed. And instead, I see a list of like 15 things on every single one. It's almost as if, you know, we're throwing a dart at the wall and hoping one of these things sticks and helps us improve. But so let's go to another one. And you guys can help me locate, because I have the original printouts. Russell County, it's 2021. And it would be the section again, similar section, what were the results, effects of student impact? So let's look at the same section on theirs. And let's look at the 2 through 5th grade. I'm sorry, let's look through, yeah. Basically what I'm seeing, actually, let's go down to the one below that. Let's do 6th grade, 6 through 8. So I just picked the middle grade, 7th grade for that. And it says that they use an Ames Web reading data that showed they improved from 72 to 88%. Now, I don't have data on that, so I can't say. They didn't use anything else that I could measure. But let's compare it. If that sounds like they're doing great, right? That sounds like they're doing really, really good. And maybe that's the best measurement. But the state assessment shows for ELA in 7th grade that 50% of students are not grade level. They're level 1. 50%. And if you take the next grade up or the next level up, which according to what we have shared with the federal government, levels 3 and 4 are proficient, it's 31%. So 80%, over 80% of students are not proficient, and yet this report says 72% gain. I mean, there was a gain of about 10%. So, I mean, is one of those measurements really bad and one of them good? Well, let's look at math. Let's look at the math scores. It says their math score improved from 56 to 77% on grade level over the 21-22 school year. I pull it up on state assessment, a different measure. I don't know what their measure is. And again, 36% are in level 1, 50% are in level 2. That means that 86% of those students, according to our state assessment, are not proficient. But we're reporting it as if there's improvement. So I'm confused. And I think I'm frustrated. And so, and then one more point I want you to take a look at. You can pick any school district you want. And then just all you have to do is look at the list of evidence-based practices. And then just know how many they give. And I don't know about you, but I think Representative Hill talks about regression, analysis, something, yeah, where you're trying to, you can simply put your dependent variable here and your independent here, and you don't take 10, you try to take a few to find out where you're hitting it on that line. How in the world will they ever know what's being effective and what's not? But if you look at the at-risk numbers, and they should be reporting based on at-risk numbers. And it's not even clear that the data that they're giving is at-risk data or if it's all student data. So I guess I'm disappointed because it appears to me, and I could be wrong, but it appears to me that these are evaluations where they're going through their forms created, they're going through the motions, just the way it looks, I could be absolutely wrong, and that they may not mean a whole lot. And I would like, this is a discussion, so take a look at these and tell me what questions you have, what comments you have. We've got two experts here. Representative McNorton.
So we don't have a standardized form or whatever they have to fill out to get these numbers. It's just whatever they fill to use is what they're sending in. Is that what?
Well, actually, the statutes give some criteria of what they're supposed to include, and so you could look to see, but it actually asks the state board, and I think that's Kansas Department of Education, they are to generate a format that, and I think, Nick, is that correct? They are to generate a format in which to produce, yes. Yeah, and so they generated a format that fulfills the statute, and then, but then what? Representative, you are a school board member. What do you think?
Well, looks like you can make stuff, not make stuff up, but pick and choose what you want to report. You can pick and choose what you want to report to make yourself look good. Just looking at these real quick, you can pick whatever data you want based on whatever process you want to come up with the numbers that makes yourself look good. But when you compare it to the state assessments, they don't jive, like you were pointing out. And I would like to see our report from our school district, but.
Right, I know. This is something that I have asked my school superintendents to provide the report, and some have given those reports, some haven't. What other thoughts or questions? Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if all of us are a little bit confused, I think that's fairly easy to justify looking through this. One of the questions I would have is, are they pre-selecting measurement criteria when they start into a program? This almost looks like they're post-selecting measurement criteria. Basically, we've got, I looked at this one that they had 38 students in the school. They had 15, I counted 15 separate programs. And then there's numerous measurement criteria after that. As a researcher, to me, you kind of want to identify the important things to look at, and then you want to standardize that so that you can see whether there's changes that are meaningful. And this looks a lot more like that we are fulfilling some criteria, but we want to make sure that everything that we published looks pretty good. And I don't mean to denigrate what they're publishing here, but in the real world, not everything we do works. And it would increase my confidence of the actual reporting if there was some measurement criteria that said, oh, this program didn't work, this program did work. Instead, it just looks like a mass chaos of we're using a lot of different programs, we're using a lot of different measurement methods, and there's no standardization. And I understand local district control. I'm a big supporter of local district control, but when you're reporting to the state, there really needs to be some sort of standardization so it makes some sense. And honestly, granted, this is the first time I've looked at this. If I studied it a long time, I might be able to come up with some really amazing conclusions out of it, but I doubt it looking at it. Thank you.
I'm going to make a comment real quick, and then you're next, Representative McDonald. If we want to see how we're doing overall, I just pulled up at-risk students, and I did expand it to free and reduced because just because we have the proxy of the free doesn't mean that those are the only services. There are 11 categories. For example, if you're falling behind, technically you're at risk, grade level. So I just pulled up one for all grades, free and reduced, and we have a situation in 2018, and I think this is consistent from 2015, because I've been doing this just a little while, and in 2018, 41.15% of students were in level 1. Now it's 46.22. In 21 and 22, post-COVID, we like to always bring up that, it's 2-point difference. So that's good. However, the total amount in those two levels that are not proficient is still 82%. 82%. And I don't know by anyone's standards that that would be okay. And that's just a math test. That's all grades. And that just really concerns me. But before you go, here's what they had to provide in the report. They had to provide the number of students that were eligible or received services, the type of at-risk and provisional at-risk educational programs, so that they had to say what type of programs, the services provided, and the number of students that they provided those services to, and any data and research the school district utilized in determining what programs and services were needed. And then finally, they had to track and report the longitudinal performance of students. Gets back to longitudinal. So the use of longitudinal, I think that I have seen the reports are just, here's what happened this year, here's what we're using to measure it. But here's the catch, that are continuously receiving at-risk programs and services. And I would think continuously showing improvement. I'm not seeing that. Representative McDonald.
I just need you to back up a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm trying to find, I like this assignment where we compare and contrast. I'm just having a little trouble finding the website that you're talking about, like the specific page. I can't find, I'm on the Kansas Department of Education and I've looked at NAEP scores, but I don't see anywhere that it's broken down on the page I'm looking at by just at risk. So if you could just back up a little bit, I can't keep up with you. Sorry.
Sure. Actually, we made improvements to this website, our committee, in 2018 or 19. We made improvements, and actually, Kansas Department of Education did a great job of adding a button that we actually put in statute. And so if you go to the home page and you go to the very right-hand side, it'll say accountability reports. So click on that button. It looks like this. Okay, when you click on that, there's different types of reports you can do. I would choose the longitudinal. That's where you're going to be able to get the data that I'm referencing. And then once you do, you can put your school or you can do your state totals. I just was doing state totals here in a minute. And you can say, do you want on the right-hand side, you can say, what school year do you want to look at? Or do you want to look at the last 5 years? Which, by the way, we put that in legislation that we wanted to have. You had to, that the KSDE had to maintain 5 years. So either John or Gabby was with me back in those days. But then you can choose you can choose your subject, and then you can choose your grade level, and then you can choose your subgroup. Now, by the way, these subgroups are the ones that are reported to, or at least many of them are reported to the federal government. So they do track the subgroups. Did you find it? I'm getting there. Okay. Discussion's open. Floor is open for committee members. Yes, Representative Schmoy, and then Representative Hill.
I would like to know, as far as the evidence-based programs and practices that were utilized, percentage-wise, and what the target student was for some of these, because it doesn't have it broken down. Were we using these with every student? Were we using these targeted students? I would like to know what we were actually looking at as far as percentage-wise, how many of the programs actually touched what percentage of students?
Well, that would be a good thing to know, and I can't answer that for you. Representative Hill, and then Representative Hoskins.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that, looking through this, I mean, I was absolutely amazed at is that apparently we're doing a fantastic job of keeping at-risk kids in our school, because everybody that was identified as at-risk was served, even though we're looking at about 22,000 kids. So I guess none of those kids transferred out of district during the year because they served those kids for the entire year.
Are you referencing 22,000 special education students?
No, the numbers that they.
Oh, yes, correct.
And the numbers of how many were identified and how many were served were exactly the same in every school district except for Russell. And so I'm questioning how serious they took those numbers, or if they just took the number and put it down at the next spot. Because I would guess that some kids transfer out of districts, new kids transfer in that are at risk, et cetera. Let's see. My mind's going. I had another question. I'll think of it. Yep.
Representative Poskin.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that occurs to me is that there is a list of 11 factors that could identify somebody as at risk, and some of them are completely unrelated to each other. And so we could potentially have 11 different programs to meet that specific criteria. So then we have 11 different measures, 11 different programs. So I think it's an incredibly complex subject. And are there 11 different evidence-based best practices that have 5 years of longitudinal studies to support them? So I don't see how something that isn't 100 pages long can't address that and add causality to, I mean, it's.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with you that on one hand, that 5 years evidence base is just not going to work. So I agree. The second point, I don't think you need 11 different programs for kids that have challenges. That, you know, there are dyslexia that could fall into at-risk or could fall into special education, depending on the spectrum of need for that. So that has specific needs, but for many of the students that are in the list of 11 that you're citing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need a specific program for them. And I'm going to give an example. The JAG-K program. The JAG-K program spends, or school districts spend $1.3 million on the JAG-K program. They provide one teacher, and I think they're in 106 different, they have 106 different programs. They're in 47 school districts. And so what they do is it's about $85,000 a program, and they provide a kind of like a JAG instructor that's with them every single day, those kids that are at risk. So you could have 11 different types of needs of students that have somebody caring for them, checking on them, and they do this in the summer as well. But think about this for a minute. This program is highly successful with 85% of their graduates 12 months after they graduate that are in either getting a certification or in college or in the military. They track that. Now, that's a huge success rate. And our school districts get $750 million, and they're only spending $1.3 million on a program that's as successful as that. Now, it's not the only program. There's Community in Schools, which is now Sparkville. There are other things, but that's a real program that takes real groups of kids and follows them. And yet, it's a small amount of money. One more comment, and then we'll pass it on to the next. Oh, you're still going?
Well, I would just follow up that we have a lot of students who score in level 2 that have the same outcomes and the same postgraduate certification success in secondary, post-secondary education, et cetera, in the military and so forth.
Yeah, and so for when I talk about proficiency, it's not as if that you can't have a student that scores level 2 that's not highly successful. It's really about trends. It's really looking at how kids are doing. Are we doing better, or are we doing worse? And we really wouldn't even have to get into all these reports. We wouldn't even need the reports if we just saw that there was a trend for improvement. But we're not. We're seeing the trend go the other way. So that's the thing. It's not that there aren't exceptions to every single one of these stories. There are kids that might score in the top that are not going to be very successful. Before we go to the next one, because I love that we're all getting into the discussion, I just want to read one more thing that's in statute. It says in statute, under Part 4, under 72-5151, Part 4, I'm going to kind of move down in midway. It says, if a school district that qualifies for the high-density at-risk student weighting does not spend such money on such best practices, the state board shall notify the school district that it shall repay such money to the school district's at-risk education fund on or before January 15th of each year. The state board shall notify the House and Senate Standing Committee on Education or any successor committees which school districts had to repay such money and the amount of money such school district repaid for the preceding school year. Now, I want to note something here. We had an LPA audit in 2019, or was it 2018? I think it was 2019. And then we had one just recently in 2023. Both of those audits, one with the 5-year changes, 5-year evidence base, one without. So both of those showed that the money was not being used for services that are above and beyond. You can't count what is in a regular classroom. It's above and beyond services. You know, I gave the example of JAG. That's above and beyond. And so both of those showed that. As far as I know, and Jennifer, maybe you will know, or Melinda, have we ever had a report made to the Senate or the House Standing Education Committees that any school has not used their funds, high-density at-risk funds, the way that they should? Do you guys know of any report? No. No, I don't know of any report. But yeah, we've had 2 audits that show this is not how it's supposed to be done. All right, Representative McDonald.
I'm happy to sit with you after this and look at the website because I'm just not finding somewhere that says just at risk.
It actually says, so what we do is we have a proxy, and the proxy is free, and I use free and reduced because that is a more complimentary example of it. And just also to help kind of clarify, when you have a higher poverty rate, then your chance of success diminishes, and so there is a correlation, and so that's why the proxy exists, because A, it provides a definite and clear quantitative amount of money, and number 2, it does correlate with success, and so that's why we use it. And that's what, so at risk is our proxy, and so we're using free and reduce. So I'm going to go to Representative Estes and then Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I sit back and think about this, yes, we absolutely need some uniform things to help guide our decision-making. We owe that to the people from whom we collect taxes and to the children who we owe an education. And when I think about it, I think we're all in agreement the 5-year requirement is not working. And I think in order for us to measure what we're doing, we have to first define success. One common way to do it is the state assessment, because it's what's commonly used. I think districts are using different screeners, but, and we don't want to dictate to districts what screeners they can use. I see the use of screeners going up, and I'm very glad to see that. I think that's helping to guide decisions. However, I really think it's time for us to think outside the box to some degree, because I think what we all really care about is the money working? Are the kids benefiting? So when we look at changing that 5-year requirement, do we want to spend some time finding a creative way to say, if you have something that shows sound research for 1 or 2 year period, can we allow that, but yet we also go ahead and use the data that we're collecting on ourselves to measure early and often if we're on the right track, so we don't allow something like 3 Qs to go on for as long as it did. And on a side note, whatever solution that we come up with, I don't want to prohibit anybody from using some of the data that they're using because it might be a requirement for whatever grant they have or whatever parent organization they have. But if we can balance that out and be mindful that we don't want to test our kids to death, I think it's time for us to define success, figure out how we get our data, manage our data, and use it early and often.
All right, thank you, Representative. And I really hate wasted time. So if these reports are a waste of time and we're not doing anything and we're requiring a whole list of things and it's not working, let's scratch it all. You tell me how we're going to improve, but we need some quantitative way to measure it. We have to, you can have all kinds of screeners, you can do whatever you want, but we have to have at least one way that we can all look at the data, and that's why the state assessment is the uniform option. And if you can show improvement, then that is game on. That's exactly what we want. All right, we're going to just take a couple more comments, and then I want you to just, sleep on these evaluations, and then we'll close up. So, Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure what kind of dreams I'm going to have sleeping on this, but the question I couldn't think of earlier and maybe this is to staff, but we use free and reduced as our proxy, but when these reports are done, they're actually done off of kids that meet the criteria for at risk. And have we ever done an analysis of how close we're hitting that?
I'm not sure how we would know except for their reports, and I don't know.
If we compared their report with what they actually got, the numbers they actually reported of free and reduced, it should be a simple thing to, like the district we're looking at here, the first district, they give us a number of how many kids they actually served. And we should know from the school finance formula what their free and reduced lunch numbers were. And to, because we always say that's a great proxy. Is it really?
Well, we've definitely played around with that, and it gets very difficult. And since we've seen such a huge jump in how much we're paying, I think a lot of that's direct certification and Medicaid. I don't understand anything else that's caused such a huge jump in 2 years. The only thing I can think of is the direct certification. If there's something else, then our team will let us know later. But Jennifer, you can answer that question.
It's just a simple question. KLRD does not currently have a list that compares the two back and forth. That is something, if you would like us to look into, we'd be happy to look into how to do that, but we do not currently have one of those that we have done in the past.
I think that their reports actually, they indicate, so you could look it up, you could see what their free and reduced number is, or they're free. It's not free and reduced, they're free. I say free and reduced because it actually makes it seem a little bit better. And then you could see how many extra people that they're serving.
Okay.
So that might be the easiest way.
It seems like I remember sometime or another that free lunches are protected data. That's confidential data, but we must use it. Because we put it into the formula what those numbers are. So they get paid based off of those numbers, I assume. Then I wanted to make a comment about assessments, and I think every one of us around this room are concerned about these kids that are at risk, because if you look through those, 11 categories, these are kids. It basically says kids that are not performing the way that we expect that kids should perform in schools. And I don't know what the simple answer is for assessment, but I'm not as nearly as concerned about whether suddenly these kids get to some arbitrary point as I am that these kids show progress over time. And, I mean, if you are below grade level, I mean, this is a oversimplification of term, but if you are below grade level at third grade, are you still below grade level at fourth grade? Are you still below the same people measured over time? Are we making progress on them? Because I think that's at the heart of what at-risk funding is about, is touching those lives of kids that are at risk for failure, and do we make a difference in their lives? So I'm that's much more philosophical than practical, but I would encourage us to look that direction.
One more comment or question from our committee. Representative Owsley, you get the last one. Oh,
Thank you, Madam Chair. And
we'll finish with Representative Johnson.
I don't have a question anyways. Just as we're having this discussion, you said everybody's willing to participate. I would say that if any of the school districts that reports we're looking over here have anything that they'd like to bring to my attention, I'd be happy to receive that in an email, because I do feel like this discussion maybe could be a little bit better rounded if they were able to be here and participate. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and that's fine. They can certainly share, but they have shared their reports, and they are open to the public, and they were randomly selected. I didn't select any of them. So, but if they want to do as you invited them to do, they're welcome to do so.
I am
Anytime.
curious what a randomizer is as well, but I can take that one offline.
Well, I'll let you talk to Jennifer because I trust her. I really do. And I did not, Jennifer, did I ask you to do anything other than random? No, and she explained how she did it. So I definitely did not. Because I might have gone an entirely different direction because yeah. So definitely not. Okay, I said we were going to finish up. So Representative Johnson, if you have a really quick one, then we'll do it. And then we got to close. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the, I'm in District 500, which is where I taught part of my time. Describe the services provided with state at-risk funds. It says USD 500 utilizes the majority, approximately 31 million of at-risk funds to cover the cost of additional classroom teachers, 463, to lower class sizes of core instructions, especially in core content areas. Other staff salaries supported through at-risk funds include, and it lists at-risk people. So we're funding 463 core teachers that teach regular classrooms and have SPED students. Is that how I'm interpreting this?
At-risk students. They could have special education students as well.
But I was never certified in SPED. Yet I taught SPED students in these core classes, but they're using that to pay the salaries as I'm reading this.
Well, so special education and at-risk can overlap. You can have students that qualify for both weightings, but they are different. So at-risk students do not have to have an IEP, and they could be identified by a counselor or a teacher. They wanted to provide additional services for them. Whereas a special education student is identified by an IEP or a 504 plan, and there can be overlap. And you're correct, when you were a teacher, you would have both in your classroom. But this one's just, this pot of money, that $750+ million is the at-risk pot. There's another pot for special education. I know it gets confusing.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And Representative Featherston, you get the last word.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure I have the proper numbers to turn into Representative Wynn when I leave tomorrow. So the JAG program, which is so successful, says it serves 5,566 students with that $11.3 million. And then the $700 million you're referring to for all schools in Kansas, is that over 1 year or over multiple years?
Yes, and okay, so it's 1.364 for the JAG K program that school districts are spending. JAG K is actually spending more. So the schools may only spend somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000 per program, but the program costs $85,000. So the schools aren't putting very much in. So the money comes from the state, it comes through TANF, it comes through some federal dollars, and not 100% sure. Oh, actually, correction dollars. I'm on appropriations. Don't ask me why. Anyway, I think there's a correlation there. But what I was mentioning, Jennifer, is it 750 million for at-risk total? Because there's several pots. You've got the LOB pot, you've got the regular at-risk, and then you've got the high density. And I think it's pretty high. She's checking. And frankly, if it didn't matter, we could just put it all in one pot and say, have at it. But we were trying to follow the court's order and target the money, targeted money. But it doesn't feel very targeted.
Madam Chair, my computer is not wanting to play with me right now, but I'll be happy to get that information for everybody as soon as possible.
No worries. Thank you very much. All right, committee, thank you for taking time to look at these reports. I hope you will spend a little bit more time thinking about at-risk and what would be some great solutions for our Kansas kids. Tomorrow, we will do our budget and just make recommendations to the full appropriations. Have a great evening.